Well, welcome everyone. I have a fantastic treat for you right now. I am with Bob Spiller. And Bob Spiller, besides being a master of time and space, is the author of the Bonnie Pinkwater mystery series, The Witch of Agnesi, A Calculated Demise, Irrational Numbers, Radical Equations, and Napier's Bones. His teacher, Sleuth, uses mathematics and her knowledge of historic mathematicians to solve murders in the small Colorado town of East Plains. A retired mathematician, Robert lives in Colorado Springs, Colorado with his wife, Barbara, where he loves to play pickleball. And Bob is one of my favorite people in the whole world. He is also a client of mine, and he has written the most fantastic, beautiful literary historical fiction called A Thousand Miles from My Home, which is the book of his heart. And if you want to tell us a little bit about that book, Bob, you could real quick.
Okay. Well, I know I don't look it, but in my youth, I was arrested for marijuana and the military, and I did some time in a military prison. And truth be told, I don't know if this will offend anybody, but I liked military prison much better than I liked the military. Anyway, and so consequently, I spent some time there, and whereas the book is not a memoir, there is no names in the book which are the same as anybody else. It talks about my time in a jail out in the middle of Death Valley, and then also a revolutionary jail that the Air Force only had in existence for like 3 or 4 years called the Retraining Group, which allowed me, as somebody who was arrested, who could have ruined my life actually, to return to active duty and get an honorable discharge, which allowed me to have the life I did, which was blessed and wonderful. I got to teach mathematics to junior high school students for 35 years. And it just it's about that. And it's well, it is the book of my heart. It makes me happy every time I scan through it. And hopefully we'll find a home for it,
hmm And
Brandy and
Bob,
I.
and Bob is from Mobile, Alabama, and he has the most wonderful Southern voice, Southern writing voice. It's just hilarious when in this particular piece. So that's something that I particularly enjoy, as well as a commentary on some really difficult things in history, the civil rights movement, and just all kinds of things that you get into there. So. Yeah, Bob is an amazing person, an amazing teacher, and you are in for a treat because he is about to teach what?
I'm teaching a class on evocation. Okay, so first of all, it may not be clear to everyone what evocation is. It's got several layers like an onion, okay, or a parfait. Anyway, the long and short of it is so I'm going to give you a definition in just a minute, but I'm going to talk about mostly talk about evocation with regard to how a writer can use it and how they can use it to actually make their reader part of their story. And so I'll read you a definition of evocation right now, and then we'll talk about that just a little bit, and we'll talk about it in a broad sense, and then we'll also talk about it as it applies to writers, because I think it's, if you can pull it off, and I think some of the most successful writers in the world don't. Okay, I'll be talking about some of those. It doesn't mean they don't have good books. Okay, but some of them who do that, and well, I've got one with me right now, which I just can't say enough good things about it. So the word is evocation. The root word is evoke. Okay, and this is the American Heritage Dictionary. Okay, it is to summon or call forth. So people that are uh, into summoning angels or demons or whatever, that's an evocation. They're evoking those guys, okay, to create anew, especially by result of the imagination. And that's more closely in tune to what we're going to talk about today, which is basically how a writer can use evocation to not just tell something to people. And I know I don't want to get into that whole thing, tell versus show versus tell. Although, truth be told, I've got a class coming up in that because I think it's the most overused trope in all of writing, especially by writing teachers, and which I consider myself one because I have a class with veterans. but it's a matter of how much you want to draw in your reader as opposed to just giving them the entire description and layout of the land and all the stuff that's necessary to tell a story. So anyway, what we've got here is basically we are going to try to get the reader to be to evoke in the reader some memory of their past, and they go, "Oh, yes, I remember that." And once you do that, it's not a matter of owning them. You now are a co-conspirator in the telling of your tale. They are going along and they're going to be part of your story. And so, enough of that for now. Okay. Although I do love dictionaries, I love them a lot. In fact, I just took a class from a linguist who is listed in this book. She's one of the usage staff of that book. Anyway, I'm going to take you back to something that happened to me when I was young. I read Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit first, and then I didn't think I was going to be able to get into Lord of the Rings because it was so much different than The Hobbit. Hobbit's a children's story, and Lord of the Rings simply isn't. It's a story for adults, but it is a fantasy story. And when I got to the end of it, it wasn't just a matter of me missing those characters. I would. But somehow or another, Tolkien put me into that place. As a young man, I wanted to matter. I wanted to be someone who was a hero. And it allowed me, through the lives of those people, I could see the things they were doing. I still quote from that thing today. Uh, Aragon says something to the effect of, "There'll come a day when we'll forsake our friends, but today is not that day. Today is a day where we will be faithful, we will be honorable." And I have not always lived up to that. But that book put me in a place where I could be that person for a period of time. And when I got done with it, I went into a bit of a depression because I had been living as a secondary character in that book for as long as it took me to read the 3 volumes of Lord of the Rings. I immediately went out and got the Silmarillion, and of course was disappointed, like 99% of the people in the world that got it. But the bottom line is, I did turn around, of course, and read Lord of the Rings again and again and again because I had to go back there. But it wasn't the same. I mean, he did the same thing. He took me back there, but he evoked in me that hero that I always wanted to be. Okay. Anyway, so that's what I'm going to talk about today is what is it we do to evoke in our reader the sense that they're part of the story and they're doing 50% of the work. But what's weird is they're loving it. Okay. So I'm going to read you something from, and this is, it's called Go as a River, and it's by a lady named Shelley Reed. And she is, oh, a wonderful writer. This is her debut novel, which I found to be just remarkable. Okay. And she's a Colorado writer. I do not know her. I did ask her permission to read from this book, and I will read it. And it's really nothing remarkable that she does. This is the opening paragraph, which I'm going to read to you. Uh, it's not about she's describing earth-shattering things. What she did in me is it took me there and I went, oh yeah, yeah, I remember that. I remember doing that. I remember being there and doing that thing. And so here's the opening of Go as a River by Shelley Reed. Oh, and please, if you have a chance, pick this book up. I imagined what lingers on the black bottom of a lake. Debris, rivered in or tossed from boats, growing shaggy and soft. Pouty fish swim their strange lives far from the hook in inseparable breath and motion. Imagine, and now she's actually inviting me to imagine. Imagine patches of lakeweed dancing like lithe, unobserved women, standing on the edge of the lake, the low waves gulping at your shoes, and imagine how close you are to a world as silent and as alien as the moon. Okay. And basically, she's just talking about river muck. but and immediately I was there. And the story is about there's a lake in Colorado called Blue Mesa, and there's a town underneath that lake. They flooded that basin and took out that town. And it's still there. Well, it's rotting probably by this time. It's been, I think they did it 30 years ago, maybe 40 or 50. Anyway, the bottom line is she describes muck in such a way. She could have put many, many, many more words in there about muck. But what she did is I immediately went to my experience of having river muck squish between my toes. I brought that into the story. She evoked that in me. And from that point on, she owned me. Now, it's not a bad thing. I didn't mind a bit. Okay. I wanted to be part of this story. I wanted to be part of the sadness that comes in from having your town flooded because it's for the greater good. A lot of folks use that lake as their drinking water. But for the couple hundred people that lived there, it was a bad thing. And that's not the point I'm trying to get across. That is what the book's about, which is why all of you should read this book because it's wonderful. The thing I guess what I'm trying to get across is she put me in the story and I never left. I took that as my invitation to be part of her story, and every chance I got, I walked in the same places as those characters. And when we write, and it's not always possible, okay, and it's a skillful thing to do. When we write in such a way that our reader goes, "Oh yeah, I've done that. I remember how that was." They are part for at least that moment, for that split second. They are part of your story and they will read the next couple pages simply by that one emotion they just had. They will have it and it'll feel good. And because we all love that, okay, we live here. Okay, it's amazing that we do because this is just a big ball of fat inside our head. Anyway, but the bottom line is she had me. Okay, that's how good she is. This is her debut novel, which means I hate her. Anyway, the bottom line is that's what we're going to talk about a little bit. And it's not going to be a long lesson. It really isn't. I'm going to just give you some pointers as to how you can do that same thing with your writing. Okay. All right. So now I'm going to take it to the opposite extreme. I'm not going to read any more stuff to you. I'm going to talk to you about somebody who's stupidly successful. Lee Child. He writes the Jack Reacher novels, and there is I last count, I think there was a skillion of them, and they're all about this giant of a man who can beat up anybody. Okay. And they do not do that to me. I've read my fair share of them. Don't get me wrong. I've looked at two movies and two series with Jack Reacher in it. So I do like him, but I'm not 6 feet tall. He's 6'5", actually. He is almost indestructible. And and every time Lee Child comes to a place to talk about something, he describes the living daylights out of it. Okay, he leaves nothing to chance. He leaves no space for my imagination to inhabit his story. I'm simply reading it just like I'm watching a TV show. And don't get me wrong, I read TV shows. I mean I watch TV shows all the time where they do the same thing. I'm a passive, which is the word we want to be talking about here because we don't want our reader to be passive. I'm a passive observer of the events of the story. And if we do that really, really well, we can have success. But that's not what this lesson's about. This lesson's about going one step further and making your reader an active participant in your story. Okay. Now, if what she did here is Shelley Reed, is she gave me not all of the possibilities of how you talk about muck. I mean, you could have gone on and on. And actually, she almost ruins the thing by the second paragraph, which is why I didn't read it to you. She goes on and describes muck a little bit more because then she's describing the fact that her house is now a thing of muck. And it's just not the same. Anyway, you hold back some of it. You realize you get to a place and it takes some practice. It takes some sometimes people will say to you, well, you didn't dramatize this enough, or you didn't describe it enough, and I can't picture it. And if that's the case, for that particular person, they're not actively in your story, and you should probably listen to them. Maybe you do need more description. But the truth of the matter is, if you do it just right, it's very Goldilocksy. If you do it just right, you give them enough that they go, oh yeah. And then all of a sudden it locks into something that's inside them. Their heart comes out of their chest and they literally lay it between the pages of your book. Okay. And they live that thing. And I think I've done that sometimes in some of my books. Okay. Especially in the last one, because I wanted folks to be able to feel. I wanted someone to feel what it was like to dress stupidly during the Woodstock era. So I wrote about it. Okay. To wear bell bottoms that covered, that you couldn't even see your shoes. Okay. And then you just sort of went along and you sort of shuffled along inside these giant pants. Okay. And so there were people who wore those, but people, and hopefully those people said, yeah, I remember wearing those. I remember doing that. And then there were people that don't. And that's the risk you take when you use evocation. Okay. The bottom line here is there are going to be people, it's like telling a joke. There are going to be people who don't get the joke. There are going to be people that you don't evoke an emotion or evoke an image in their heart. That's just going to happen. Okay. Not everybody has have the same experiences as everybody else, but that doesn't mean you just shouldn't try. Okay. If that's an important image that you have there and you think the type of reader that you're writing this book for will have that same experience and will have that, if you can bring that out in them, then you're going to have not just a reader, but a friend that's going to say, oh, I am so pleased to be where I am right now. I can't picture being anywhere else besides in the pages of this book. And they're living that particular story. Okay. But it's a risk. And I've seen really good writers, okay, who pull it off, but critics who don't get it. They go, oh, well, they didn't. They say, well, they didn't get me. Yeah, but maybe they got someone else. I don't necessarily write for critics. Okay. First and foremost, I write for myself. But secondly, I write for an idealized reader. Okay, and the current book that my agent Brandy Vallance has, I'm writing for someone who's interested in that era and maybe even lived in it. Hopefully not just the people that lived in it, because I'm 73 and there's a lot of people that didn't make it to my age that lived through that. And that's too bad, but they're dead, and that's the way it is. Anyway, the long and short of it is hopefully even people that didn't have that exact experience had an experience that's close enough that they go, yeah, I know what that's like. Okay. And if I had to give you a case in point, I saw somebody actually write about eating a creamsicle. Now, for those of you who have never had a creamsicle, it is heaven. It is an orange sherbet thing with vanilla ice cream in the middle. And if you're not careful, the vanilla ice cream will melt first, and then the whole thing will fall off the stick. And that's just terrible because there it is on the ground. Although in my youth, I have picked it up and eaten it anyway. Anyway, it just depends on where it falls. And he wrote about it in such a way, and he didn't use too many words. And I was there. I had a creamsicle in my hand and I was licking my way through the orange sherbet to get to the vanilla ice cream middle and take that first bite, which is a mixture of orange sherbet and vanilla ice cream. So I want you to imagine, because hopefully a number of you who are watching this are actually writers. I want you to imagine the next time you're writing a scene, you're going to have to put some description in. And hopefully you're one of those people that show and don't tell, and everybody's going to think you're just wonderful. Okay. You have the opportunity, obviously, to lay down word after word after word after word and describe the scene so thoroughly that they can't miss it. You know, um, You want to show somebody actually walking down the street in one of those long blocks in New York City, which every 25 feet is an elm tree. Okay. You can do that. You can actually write about how it is and how the elm tree looks and how it's held up by wires and how there's a gate around the middle so that it doesn't get a gate. I mean, a sort of a chicken wire fence around it. Anyway, you could, but imagine if you could get across that particular thing and all of a sudden your reader was writing the rest of it for you. Oh yeah, I've walked down streets in Detroit or New York or Philadelphia or Chicago where they have that exact same thing where they have the long blocks because theoretically, okay, back in those back east places, 10 blocks made a mile. So each block was a tenth of a mile, which is to me, it seemed like a long thing. Maybe it's not so long now that I'm older, but it seemed like a long block when I was there with my dad and he took me to on a vacation and we walked down the street and I got to suck in all the ambiance of New York. Imagine writing about that, walking down the street and looking at the brownstones and looking at all the things in the museum out facades that are out there, yet somehow getting across this person's also been there. They've also seen the things which I'm going to try to describe and holding back. Okay. And it's going to be so easy to hold too much stuff back or so easy to give out too much. And all I can tell you is to try, okay? Because if you do it, the reward for your reader will be extensive. They will feel something that they don't feel in ordinary books where the person describes. And I'm not going to spend just everything. The person just describes everything. I'm not going to spend too much time beating on this too much uh, because I can't take your hand and help you do that. Okay. You're going to have to actually and go, by the way, I do have one idea for how to do it. Practice this skill on short stories. Okay. On short stories, you have to be frugal with your descriptions anyway, for the most part. Practice this on short stories to get your chops in. Okay. If you're young, you've got a lifetime to get there. Imagine though, you start doing that now as a young person, as a young writer. Imagine how good you will be at that. Stephen King was good at it at 20, 25. When he wrote Salem's Lot, and those of you who read that about a vampire, he wrote about a guy in one of those upstairs mills in just May, but it's so hot upstairs that the sweat was dripping off his arm like oil running down it. And we've all had that. We've sweat so much because there's so much humidity in the room or in the place we're at. Like if you were, I'm a big fan of swamps. Okay. You're there and it's wonderful to be there. And there's alligators and water moccasins and snapping turtles, and they're all wonderful. But the truth of the matter is it's hot. And he wrote in such a way that I was back there. And I went, yeah, I know what it's like to have my shirt stick to the back of my body and to look down and there's this little wet spot right where my belly starts, where I wish my belly wasn't. Anyway, the long and short of it is I I can't hold your hand and do all that stuff for you, but it is worth trying. Okay. And people will tell you you didn't do a good job of it. And if you did a good job with something the first time you try it, well, gosh, it wouldn't be worth doing. I am currently practicing how to play Pachelbel's Canon on my guitar, and the middle part is kicking my butt. Okay. I am not good at it. Just as a matter of the same thing with writing. Okay. You can pour too much stuff on the paper or not enough. But wouldn't it be great if you got to the place where you poured the just the right amount and you lit a spark in the mind of your reader in such a way that they go, I'm not going anywhere. And that's about all I really have to say about that.
I love that, Bob. That is so wonderful. Oh my goodness, you had so many amazing quotes. I'm dying over. The reader's heart comes out of their chest and they lay it between the pages of your book. That is what we want. Oh my goodness.
Yes,
Yes.
yes,
And evoking the memory and the emotion and the sensory detail. So they're actually having an experience in their body, in their mind, those, tapping into those things into their soul. And you said that the reader is doing 50% of the work, and that's what we want. And just the theater of the mind. If an author can grasp hold of the theater of the mind, then
yeah.
the writing is a completely other level. And I like to say to make your writing work harder and smarter for you. And that's why I'm always talking about messing with the reader's subconscious, by playing.
I
Yeah.
I think so. I think you're
Yeah.
absolutely right. I think you did that really well in that first book of yours that I read. I was in Israel, and I've never been to Israel.
I
Okay.
love it. Yeah.
Yes.
Well,
And running from an angry crowd, it's one
yeah.
of my nightmares.
And a
That,
runaway carriage and
yeah,
and being poisoned and just the romance and ambiance of the 19th century,
uh-huh.
everything that was going over there. But part of my,
Yeah.
part of my study was just sensory, it's that whole evoking thing. So how can we use the colors in the right way? So I'm really big on color psychology. And I remember you told me that more people are murdered in, was it yellow rooms? Something
They
like,
are.
yeah.
They're more murdered in yellow rooms than any other color.
Right. So
Yeah,
so
it's
I'm big.
true.
So I'm big about that. When I'm writing, I'm playing with the light a lot as I'm writing, and I'm bringing the emotion that I want to portray without saying, the character was angry. I'm going to put that in the light or the color or the props. So that's something that I'm always looking to do.
Well, you taught a really good class on that, and you called it setting. And I've tried to do that since that is, believe it or not, I've taken 14 years of Pikes Peak Writers classes, and your class is the one I still remember.
Well, thank you. That
And
was
I
my
still do. I still remember that certain settings set you up to
right.
feel a certain way.
Exactly. Like we should not be wasting any of our atmosphere at all. Like if we walk into a room, it needs to be a stage for emotion. That's really what I believe. So let's not waste any props, any lights, any smells, any sensory at all. If we have a plate of food over there, why? Why is our food there? What does the food taste like? How can it work doubly for us? So that's how I'm always trying to think about. Um,
Okay.
yeah, also something else that I think is really helpful with evocation, as you're talking about, is the poetic language. There's something that happens in the brain when we're reading words like thrum and beat of wings. And it's like when we're doing
Uh-huh.
this poetic thing, and you are so wonderful at that because you in an amazing way always just bring out historical phrases that have left our lexicon. And I love hearing just the different things and the unique ways that you'll say them because if a person was raised in the South, we're going to say certain things. And in and of itself, the way that Southerners talk, it's a story. It's
Sure.
yeah, it's just like
Yeah, I think how they can put so much feeling into bless your heart.
mhm,
Okay, and they can say it in so many different ways. My grandmother cut me to the quick with a bless your heart.
right.
You could make me feel like I was the stupidest person in the entire. You believe that? Bless your heart. Like, oh, aren't you just the dumbest thing that's ever walked through my door?
Mhm, mhm,
And yes, I now I actually have spent a lot of time in the South, but I grew up in Philadelphia.
mhm.
Yeah. My mother, on the other hand, couldn't wait to get back to the South after raising me in Philadelphia. One day she looked at my father and said, that was the last snowstorm I'm going to live through. We're going to Alabama and we're going to be there by next winter. And they
Right.
were, and they stayed for, and I believe they lived for 40 more years. They lived way into their mid 80s. And Well, I hope to live longer, but I hope to have lived as well as they lived.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Hmm.
both of them died really well, but
Hmm.
people in the South live really well too. Not all the people in the South in my family are admirable.
Hmm.
Okay.
Not all people in all families are admirable at all. So
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Uh,
right,
I
right.
had people in up in north that I knew that were not admirable. I had folks in this town, okay, that I knew that I thought, well, aren't you just something off someone's shoe? Okay, okay. But the truth of the matter is, if you do, I try not to do that much anymore because I'm 73 and I just want to have friends.
I love it.
Sometimes I don't like all my friends, but I don't want to be the person that other people look and go, I don't want him for a friend. I want to
Mhm.
be a good friend. One of the things that evocation used to mean is when exorcisms, you want to evoke something in someone and to bring forth some spiritual being, an angel or a
Mhm.
demon. And the bottom line here is that's very similar to the writing because there's something like the animus that you're activating inside somebody. And if you can even do that, then that being will actually tiptoe through your book. He'll actually say, "Oh, can we get back to the book? Okay, looks like you got a half hour. Let's get back to that book." Okay. And it's a sort of thing that you can't, and you'll stay up too late reading that book, and you'll tell all your friends about that book, and hopefully they'll have the same experience. And so, yeah, are we still recording?
Here we are. We're recording. This is good stuff. We
Well,
are.
at the bottom line is if you could do that and a second person does it, those two people can then talk about the experience they've had. And of course, if somebody else is there, they say, "What book are you talking about?" "Oh, God, you haven't read Yada?" I
Mhm.
said, "No." "Well, I've got a copy you can have, but you better give it back to me because it was signed by the author and I'm going to keep it forever. But you can have it, but you're not going to take long reading it anyway. It's that good."
Mhm.
Okay. And I have, and I'm sure all of us have had books like that. Lord of the Rings was one of my books like that. I've had movies like that where I knew because of the guy's type of intelligence what sort of things to expect and what sort of things I would do in his shoes. Uh, uh, there's a certain stupidity in the character of Sean Connery in the book The Man Who Would Be King. He's just not smart, but he's honorable in sort of a Kipling sort of way where they didn't think much of people that lived in India because they weren't Englishmen.
Mhm.
Okay. But the bottom line here is I look at him and I live in that and I've seen that movie so many times because what I do is I'm there and it's unlikely I'm going to make it to the Middle East, especially those obscure places, with the stans on the ends of their names and Islamabad and this and that.
Mhm.
But if a storyteller can do that, and some storytellers can, okay, and yeah, I couldn't agree more that the stuff that we do, especially if we make the words work for us, I think is really, really, really important.
Mhm.
Okay, any suggestions that how you would add to this class?
So I do have one. So I think symbolism is really big and evoking. And I think if you just sprinkle symbolism throughout, that is a really powerful way to evoke emotion depending on what you're trying to evoke. And you can put the symbolism as metaphor, perhaps. So metaphor and symbolism. I mean, even one example is if you're trying to evoke that no man is an island, you could have the rain in a puddle and the ripples are going out and they're crossing over one another. And without even saying that that's your theme or that's what's going on, that is going to be playing in the back of your reader's mind. And I remember you talking about the way that you pluck one guitar string and then, that can carry through to, the other ones that you're playing. It's like we're doing that kind of things with words. So, and these sorts of things come in not on the first draft, obviously. So these
Yeah.
are, we're playing with our themes and we're trying to, just kind of like deepen our compost and let things just, be rich. But I think if we play with the light and the symbolism and definitely, sensory things, that's I think a powerful way to do it.
I hadn't thought about, there's a story, oh gosh, about yellow wallpaper and how it used to be that if a husband wasn't happy with his wife, he could have her committed, and
Mm,
there's absolutely nothing that you could do about it. And this was the case in early America and also in and it happened in England a lot, especially if the fellow himself was a peer or a very rich person. And they used the yellow wallpaper in the room to symbolize how trapped this woman was in this life.
mhm,
She wanted to just rail at how constricted her life was, but she was terrified that if she did it too much, she would end up being trapped in this room with yellow wallpaper because
mhm,
she had no power.
mhm,
And in the end result, she is. She's eventually, she's not committed to an insane asylum. She is basically under house arrest for the rest of her life, and she has only access to this yellow. She lives a life of luxury, but it's in this room with yellow wallpaper, and
mhm.
the yellow wallpaper might as well be prison bars.
Right. Mhm,
Yeah, and for the writer of this story, it is,
mhm,
and yeah, a couple people who do that really well. Faulkner does that really well.
mhm.
Um, oh gosh, there was another one that I just uh, oh, I can't even remember who he is. He wrote a story called Rappaccini's Daughter. I don't know if you knew that.
I don't know that.
Guy could overlook the place he was staying, and he could look down into the garden next to his house. And there was a beautiful woman who worked in the garden, and there was the most beautiful flowers there. But sometimes it was a horrible smell that would come off the plants down there because there were some flowers down there which were not well the kind of plants that regular folks would grow. Anyway, the bottom line, and they eventually strike up a conversation, and he comes to find out that she has been, over her lifetime, been feeding on the the leaves of some of the things, and a kiss from her will kill him.
Mm,
And so he's looking down and he can see this black rose, or it's I don't think it's a rose. I think it's some other sort of thing. And it's her. Basically, she's doing the best she can. And Rappaccini, her father, is the one who he wanted to keep her with him all his life. So he built her a prison, but it's a garden. And she really can't go anywhere. Uh, she can't even be in a closed room with people because eventually they'll swoon. And so she carries her prison with her, and yet her prison is a garden. And it was, and I can't remember for the life of me who it is, but it it's somebody like the guy who wrote the House in Seven Gables or something.
mhm.
Who I
And
can't.
and you remember that and just like so unpack that. Like how was the author evoking? Was it, the colors in the flowers? Was it the atmosphere? As what is causing you to, talk about
Well,
that?
what it did for me in my lifetime, um, I have had people that I've loved that did not return my love, or it was not to be, like they
Hmm.
moved away.
Hmm.
And when I was doing that, I was going, oh man, I know what it's like to feel that way about someone, and yet it's going to be unrequited because to get near them is not possible.
Hmm.
Okay. And so what it evoked in me was memories of past loves,
Hmm.
memories of frustrated love. Okay. Um, and then even the worst possibility was the fact that your love is returned, and yet it's still going to end up being unrequited. Okay, and so it wasn't a matter of so much the setting, although the black flower uh did say it all when he eventually used that image. Okay, and her hair was raven. Oh yeah, that's right. There is
So
symbolism.
colors, we
Her
have some
hair was
colors,
raven
colors,
colored. In fact, her eyes were so brown they were almost black. And
colors. Yeah, colors.
yeah, she was Italian. Rappaccini. Her last name was Rappaccini. And the fellow who was living
So
next.
listen, Rappaccini. It's very poetic. Rappaccini. It's
Yeah,
poetry,
it
it's
is.
poetry. And then
Yes.
so we have the colors and the poetry. So it's all, melding together to bypass your
True.
head and go into your heart.
Yeah, and stayed with me.
Yeah, stayed with
Yeah,
you.
it stayed with me. And just like Aragon's speech that there'll come
Hmm.
a time we'll be faithless. There'll come a day, but today is not that day.
The day is not that day.
Yeah, today is not that day. I put that in a short story recently as a guy is killing a guy who set off a bomb in a in a in a synagogue and killed a number of children, and he has the ability to go back. And it's not just enough to stop the guy from doing it. He has to actually do it in such a way that the guy comes to a place. And so the last words they say to each other, there'll come a day. And the guy who's actually stopping him has done some horrible things to be there at that time, and he doesn't want to be part of this world either. And this other guy is already a bad person because he sets off bombs. And so they look at each other and go, today is not that day. And so the Tolkien did such a good job that I actually brought that back into a story of my own. I did
Mm.
give him credit. I didn't steal it as my own because, well, Tolkien, I mean, after all. Yeah. Had a similar thing with a C.S. Lewis book I was reading one time. You probably read a lot of Lewis
Mhm.
books, haven't
Yeah, I love C.S. Lewis.
So did you read two that come to mind are the Screw Tape Letters and the Great Divorce?
Hmm.
You read both of those
Right,
probably.
right.
Yeah. Each of them have something in it that I carry with me now to this day
Mm.
that if some people are so into who they are that even given a chance to live in paradise, they can't take it because they can't give up the pettiness in their life. And so a busload of people from hell gets to go to heaven, and most of them get back on the bus and go back to hell. Only one guy stays, and he has to give up everything that's inside him that kept him there. And so the guy who goes into heaven is not even him anymore. It's the little germ of him that was the perfect part. So that guy gets to go into, in fact, his own fears and his bigotry and such turn into a horse which he rides into heaven.
Mm.
Oh,
C.S. Lewis is powerful, brilliant, revolutionary, one of my absolute favorites
yeah.
of all time.
I
So
even
good.
like the book about the story about him called Shadowlands,
Hmm.
where at the end he's just weeping with
Hmm.
his stepson because the woman they both love, the boy's mother and his wife has
Hmm.
just passed away.
Hmm.
And I remember I was weeping too.
Hmm.
That's another one. I mean, obviously, uh, if you evoke strong emotion in folks, then you
Right.
bring that out. My wife will sometimes come and sit down and she does a thing called ding dong. No matter what I'm doing, if she comes into a room and says ding dong, everything stops. She goes, I need to read you something. And she'll read me from a piece from a book she's reading. And I go, whoa. And
Wow.
sometimes we both just sit there and cry for a little bit. For the
Mm.
writing is so
Yes.
good. And there's something about that. I
Yeah.
guess uh, Stephen King said that. He said, people always ask me where I get my ideas, but they never ask me where I get my words.
Hmm.
And really, it's the words that are the thing. And anyway, so it's in his book on writing, which by the way, if you're a reader, I mean a writer and you're doing this and you don't own that book, you really
Read
probably ought
it.
to get it. It's
Read it.
it's a really,
So
really,
good.
really good book. And
It's
it is a
so
quote
good.
that I use all the time. And Stephen King says, I write every day except Christmas. And then the second later he said, I lied. I write on Christmas too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bob, I think you're talking about as you're talking about evocation, you're talking about arts, and most writers are not looking at writing as an art form anymore. I mean, I feel like they're just they're trying to get published, and they're kind of in the shallows a little bit, and maybe it's a bit of a I was thinking today about how your first book is maybe your trauma book, because we all go through that, right? Like we're processing our trauma.
Uh-huh.
The second book might be your craft book where you're perfecting your craft. And then I was like thinking about subsequent books, but it's the authors where you're doing that and your heart just clenches and you're putting your heart between the pages like you talked about. They're artists. They're true artists.
Yeah.
And they're not just writing, dashing off a story for story's sake. They're slowing us down. And I think that's what evocation is. It's the art of slowing the reader down. I remember one time I was reading a story and the woman was just making macaroni and cheese and I was into it. I mean, it was like 5 pages of making macaroni and cheese. But, if you're committed enough to your craft and if you are pulling in all these other things and you're just perfecting some of the advanced techniques and you really have a heart for reaching the reader, I think you can do that.